أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر جل جلاله ربي أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن عليا ولي الله عليه الصلاة والسلام أشهد أن عليا حجة الله عليه الصلاة والسلام حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله
اللهم صل على محمد وعجل فرجه. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today I would like for us to look at some of the teachings that we have from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam with regard to guests and inviting guests, hosting people, and being a guest if we are invited or we are visiting somebody else. This is a very important part of our Islamic culture and Islamic teaching, and to maintain a culture of frequent visiting each other and being a good host and being a good guest is an important part of what makes a person a good Muslim. to be connected to our families and our fellow believers is one of the goals of Islam, and visiting each other, hosting each other is one of the ways that we maintain that connection. So let's begin from a few examples from the Quran. The Quran describes how Prophet Ibrahim had guests. And these guests were actually from Allah. They were messengers, angels that were sent for a specific purpose. The story is described in the Quran. But as part of that story, the Quran also gives us a reminder of our Islamic culture of being a host. And Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ in particular is known in ahadith and in history as having been a very generous and a very kind host. It was his practice never to have a meal alone. So although these guests were not human guests, they were not relatives or needy members of his city or neighbors, but Prophet Ibrahim dealt with them as a gracious host should. The Quran says, هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ الضَّيْفِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الْمُكْرَمِينَ. Have you heard the story of the honored guests of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam? إِذْ دَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ فَقَالُوا سَلَامًا. They came to Prophet Ibrahim, they said, peace. قَالَ سَلَامًا. And then he replied, salam. And in the Quran, their greeting is said to be salaman, and his reply is said to be salamun. And there is a grammatical point that is made when you say salaman, then it is a verbal sentence, I am greeting you now and wishing you peace. But when you say salamun, it is a nominal sentence, and it denotes a continuous state of peace. And so that greeting that Prophet Ibrahim gave is one step above, and it is a tahiyyah which is better than their tahiyyah. Then he says, قَوْمٌ مُنْكَرُونَ. These are an unfamiliar people, a strange people. Now, this is of course a comment by Prophet Ibrahim, which Allah has mentioned for us in order to remind us that it's one thing to host somebody that you want to host, a friend, a person that you are excited to meet and spend time with. It's quite another thing if you are hosting somebody who maybe is a relative but not your favorite relative, not somebody that you get along with very well. So this was the practice, this was the conduct and the teaching of Prophet Ibrahim with an unfamiliar and maybe a slightly strange guest, somebody that you are not immediately at ease with. Munkar implies both a lack of familiarity, that's where we have the word inkar from, and also it can mean something that you have a little bit of an aversion to or a dislike. That's where nahi anil munkar comes from. That which your nature, it turns away from because it is not good. It is disliked or dislikable. So when this people that was unfamiliar came, they're not intimate friends, how did Prophet Ibrahim treat them? فَرَاغَ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِ فَجَاءَ بِعِجْلٍ سَمِينٍ. So he went to his family and he asked them to prepare a meal, and then before long he came back with a very generous, samin means a fat, so a very generous calf, meaning he didn't just bring leftovers that I'll save the good food, the slaughtering of the good animal for guests that I know and that I have a good relationship with. Ja'a bi'ijlin samin. He brought the good meal for these guests. فَقَرَّبَهُ إِلَيْهِمْ. And then he gave them the food. فَقَالَ أَلَا تَأْكُلُونَ, and said, are you not going to eat? And of course, they were not guests who had come to eat with Prophet Ibrahim. They had a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a mission from Allah. So they had not come to eat. But the conduct of Prophet Ibrahim is a reminder for us, because sometimes we have guests that they come, maybe we don't always have the closest relationship with them. For us, they are qawmun munkarun, a people that we don't have intimacy with, closeness with, but we should treat them with respect, offer them our hospitality, treat them with courtesy. Similarly, there is the story in the Quran of the guests of Prophet Lut. These also were angels sent by Allah for the punishment of His people, but first they came out of respect that Allah gives to His prophets. They came in the form of a guest, or in the form of guests for Prophet Lut. And when the people of the city of Lut came, and they would take advantage of their guests and abuse them and rob them and commit various kinds of crime and indecency, alaykum as-salam. So Prophet Lut alayhi salam said, إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ ضَيْفِي فَلَا تَفْضَحُونَ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُخْزُونَ. Prophet Lut, he felt a responsibility to protect and to preserve the honor of his guests until they told him that they are sent by Allah and there is no harm that the people will be able to give them. So, the story of Prophet Lut, the story of Prophet Ibrahim, they are a reminder for us of the sanctity of a guest. And then one more example from the Quran. The Quran describes the Ansar, who had hosted the Muhajirin in Medina. Remember, Medina was the city and the property of the Ansar. And so the Muhajirun, they were guests. And the Quran describes the Ansar and their character. يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ. They love those people who have taken refuge among them. Normally we find in our current society, in our current political climate, people don't want refugees to come. They say they're going to create crowding and they're going to take away our jobs and take away our resources, and so keep them out, let them suffer. Or on a more personal level, sometimes if we have a family member who is in need because of their job situation, because of their family situation, because of their personal need, so we kind of separate ourselves and say, I wish I didn't know about that, or I wish I lived another 50 miles away. I don't want to host and give that's also a form of refuge that you are giving to somebody who is in need. If they are in need of a form of support. The Ansar are praised in the Quran. يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً مِمَّا أُوتُوا. And when they are given something by Allah and then they spend it in helping their needy ones, then they don't feel like, I could have used this. They're not competing with those who are needy to want to utilize the blessings and the bounties that Allah has given them. وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. And even when they are in need themselves, they prefer others to themselves. إِيثَارٌ يُؤْثِرُونَ, it means to prefer others even over yourself. وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And those whom Allah has protected from being stingy, they are the ones who will achieve success. So this is a very high praise given to the Ansar for their generosity. And although it's speaking about refugees, it's relevant to us both when we're dealing with refugees or outsiders or unwanted immigrants, but also in dealing with maybe those members of our community or our family who may be in need. Not to look only for our comfort or our interests, but to want to help them and to look for their needs and their comfort as well. Now, with regard to this verse, there is a story that is told in hadith. In the early days of the Prophet's life in Medina, as you know, the Muslims did not have an abundance of food or clothing or wealth. Sometimes there would be a harvest, sometimes there would be an income, and at other times the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his own family, and the majority of the Muslims, they did not have enough for their own needs. Sometimes they would go hungry, in particular until the conquest of Khaybar, when additional produce came and that poverty was lessened in the Muslim society in Medina. So it's said in hadith that a guest came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the Prophet did not have any food at home to host that person. So a member of the Ansar came to the home of the Prophet and he took that guest away to his own home. This was the spirit of the Ansar that the Quran describes, that the guest came to the Prophet, but that Ansari, who was now a native citizen of Medina, he said that the guest of the Prophet is my guest. I'm not going to say, well, that's your problem, but I will try to honor that guest of the Prophet. So he took that person to his own home, and then he and his wife, they prepared a meal, and then when that meal was served, he turned off the lamp that he had in the room. And probably this was going to be at dinner time after dark, so when the lamp is turned off, then there would just be very minimal light that is maybe filtering in from the moonlight or from outside, and in the darkness, he and his guest were going to consume the meal. And the guest began to eat, and he would extend his hand and bring it towards his mouth so the guest would think that he is eating as well. Now, these days we're used to electricity, and so we're not maybe able to function in low light conditions. But before the invention of electricity, people, they were very accustomed to living with whatever natural light there is. So moonlight, the light of a single candle. At nighttime, people would sometimes consume their meal, perform their Isha prayer, maybe take care of other needs in that minimal light. But they wouldn't be able to see very clearly. So the guest thought that both of them are eating. But in reality, he was just making some motion so the guest was comfortable and ate. And of course, he didn't tell anybody about that. But then the next day, when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw him, the Prophet informed him that Allah was very pleased with the generosity that you showed. And it was for this person and his spirit of generosity, going hungry so that his guest, in reality the guest of our Prophet, would be able to eat a full meal, that Allah revealed this verse, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. They give other people to eat, even if they themselves may be poor or may be in need. So these are examples from the Quran about the spirit of being a good host. Now, what are some of the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalatu wassalam with regard to hosting? One is that when we have a group of people in a city, then we should feel a collective responsibility for visitors who are members of our faith and members of our community. Now, these days, of course, there are hotels, there are many avenues available for people who are visiting a city to stay, but still those believers who are part of that city, they should feel a responsibility to help meet the needs of those who are strangers or are visitors. According to a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when a person enters a town or a city, then he is a guest of those members of his faith who are already resident in that city. So we should try to do what we can to meet their needs and to make them feel comfortable. In that time, it would also include hosting them. Today, In many cases, people may book a hotel room, they may have that met, but sometimes they may need other advice or guidance or assistance, so we should try to look out for that and do what we can. According to a hadith of our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam, the Imam says, "Min al-jafa istikhdam al-dayf." When you have a guest, don't make them do work. That is jafa. Jafa means coarse behavior, uncultured behavior. You should not have your guest work. And when the guest comes, you should help them unpack and get set up in your home. But when they're leaving, then you should not help them pack and carry their suitcases to the car, because that gives the impression that you are happy to see them leave. This is part of the culture of Ahlul Bayt, that they would assist the guests in arriving, but not in leaving, to give that message that I am not kind of sending you away, or I'm not sick and tired of hosting. Now, of course, if somebody is elderly and it's a difficulty for them to carry their own bags, then provide them assistance. But the general teaching from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam is not to do that. And then the Imam says, وَزَوِّدُوهُ وَطَيِّبُوا زَادَهُ فَإِنَّهُ مِنَ السَّخَاءِ. When your guest leaves, then give them some zad, give them some provisions, and give them good provisions. So if a guest is leaving and they're driving away, then give them some water bottles, some fruit, maybe a meal to have on the way out. Give them some provisions so that you are helping them along the way. That's not because they're needing it. That's not because there's nothing that they can buy along the way, but it is sakha. It is one way that you are showing your generosity and your love for the guest. Also, according to a hadith, when your guest leaves, then you should walk with them at least to the gate of your house and maybe a few steps outside, and not just sit where you are and say, all right, goodbye, and then they leave on their own. This is part of the honoring of the guest, which was the practice of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam and the practice of the Muslims. Then there is a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. He says that there are two kinds of guests, invited and uninvited. Meaning a guest that comes after you have invited them, and a guest that comes on their own. The Imam says that when you invite somebody, تَكَلَّفْ لَهُ, go out, meaning go all out and make an effort to be a good host. So prepare more than one meal and give them a good experience. But if they come to you uninvited, then the Imam says, فَأْتِهِ بِمَا عِنْدَكَ, give that person what you have in your home. So don't withhold something that you have available, but don't burden yourself now and send somebody out to the store and try to bring a very fancy meal. And this teaching is something that allows us both to honor our guests, but also not to be overburdened. Because sometimes that beautiful teaching of Islam about being a good host, it can become a burden for the host. Or it can become a burden for the guest. And it can be unfair to family members. They might feel like they're always having to prepare for guests. It can distract a person from their other obligations. So there's a balance in this teaching of our sixth Imam. When you invite somebody, then you go all out. Make it a whole day affair, prepare, because that was something that you had planned for. When they come, be generous with what you have available, and don't burden yourself or your family excessively. Similarly, the Imam says that when a guest comes to you, don't ask them, have you eaten something today? But rather bring them the food and say, please have some. Because generally a guest will feel a little bit shy to say, no, I haven't eaten, will you bring me something? But if you bring the food, maybe they will eat. And then there are ahadith that tell us that if you are a host, then keep something on your plate and keep eating until your guests finish their meal. And after that, you can also complete your meal. So the guests don't feel rushed or they don't feel shy in eating until they are full. Now finally, let us look at a few of the ahadith that tell us about the blessings according to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa He says, "Ad-dayf ya'ti al-qawma bi-rizqih." Your guest, they bring their rizq. When Allah sends a guest to you, Allah sends the rizq. So that will increase. Don't feel like you're going to be impoverished. وَفَإِذَا ارْتَحَلَ ارْتَحَلَ بِجَمِيعِ ذُنُوبِهِمْ. And then when a guest leaves, he takes your sins with him, or she takes your sins with her. So those sins now, not that they are going to be responsible for them, but they are forgiven. They're no longer a burden on the host. So there is a great deal of blessing in hosting. And the last hadith for this khutbah is a hadith, a very beautiful hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. Muhammad. Imam Ali says, "Qutul ajsam at-ta'am." The food and nourishment of the body is to eat. You need to eat in order to nourish your body. وَقُوتُ الْأَرْوَاحِ الْإِطْعَامِ. But the nourishment of your soul is not in eating. It is in giving others to eat, in feeding. Your body is nourished when it eats, and your soul is nourished when it shares its food and gives others to eat. And may Allah allow us to nourish our bodies and our souls with the best nourishment that He has provided. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Al-Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، لا سيما علي أمير المؤمنين، وعلى فاطمة الزهراء، وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. I seek forgiveness from Allah for myself and all of us present, and I praise Allah for His blessings and His bounties, which if we wanted to count, we would not be able to count them. Just a few more ahadith, and then inshallah we will conclude for today. It is said that one of the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam invited him to be a guest at his home. And Imam Ali said that I will come, I will be your guest under 3 conditions. The person said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, what are those 3 conditions? The Imam says that, first of all, don't buy something specially to host me. Whatever you have at home, whatever you and your family were going to eat, host me with that same food. Don't go all out and say, now the Imam is coming, so I have to make a very special meal. Second, don't hold back something that you have at home. So whatever you eat, whatever your sustenance is, bring that and host me with that same food. The Imam is teaching the person the adab of diyafa. And then very importantly, the Imam says, وَلَا تُجْحِفْ بِالْعِيَالِ. Don't be a burden, and don't let me be a burden to your family. If they're going to be preparing the meal and cleaning, cooking, getting things ready, then this can become maybe a source of honor for you and a source of pleasure for you to host me, but it might be a burden and a difficulty for your family. These were the 3 conditions. The person said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I will honor those conditions, and then the Imam accepted the invitation and he said that I will come and I will be a guest. And then finally there is a hadith of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet says that the first day of hosting is the haqq, the right that should be given to the dayf. After you have hosted a person for one day, then it is sadaqah. So if you want to give that sadaqah, then it is thawab, host them a second day or a third day, but consider it to be a sadaqah, and then we should be aware of our other obligations as well. And if I am a guest, then I shouldn't say, well, I can stay as long as I want. The first day was the right of brotherhood and the right of friendship, but after that, I am now receiving sadaqah. So how long do I want to be asking for or receiving sadaqah from somebody? I should also feel that it's not an open-ended and unending invitation, because when that generosity is abused, then the end result is that people become more hesitant or more reluctant to extend an invitation in the future. So be a good guest, be a good host, keep that culture alive so that it can bring people together, our hearts and our thoughts, and create greater bonds of friendship and unity. And of course, we can also host each other in our programs and in our centers, not only in our homes, and that allows us to be a host, not just for one person at a time, but for the entire community, and also honor Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam through the sponsorship of our ibadah programs and our majalis. So this is also hosting, but in the best possible way. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we begin Salatul Jumu'ah, just a reminder, you know that Muharram is beginning in a few days. Inshallah, Monday night will be the eve of Muharram, Chandrat as we call it, and our first majlis will be Monday after Maghrib. We will have majlis in Urdu and in English. They will both be held simultaneously at the same time right after Salatul Maghrib. So I would like to request all of you, please make an effort to join us and be present in person at those majalis on time. And the invitation is also for all of us to host and to become part of that caravan of Imam Hussein, not just by visiting, but also by hosting and volunteering and helping. Of course, because we are not finished with the concerns over COVID, anybody who is elderly and unwell, anybody who has symptoms of sickness, anybody who has been in close contact with a person who has been diagnosed, then we request you to please participate in the majalis virtually from home and not put your own health or the health of others at risk. And also, I request all of you to invite others as well. Sometimes, if you can remind somebody, if you can offer to give another person a ride, then that means that one person who otherwise might be deprived of that majlis will also be able to benefit. And if you can bring somebody to that remembrance of Imam Hussein, then that is blessings for him or her and also for you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salatul Jumu'ah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ashhadu anna Aliyan waliyullah. Hayya ala as-salah, hayya ala as-salah, hayya ala al-falah, hayya ala al-falah. حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا في الدنيا والآخرة إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إله إلا الله إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه مخلصين له الدين ولو كره المشركون لا إله إلا الله ربنا ورب آبائنا الأولين لا إله إلا الله وحده أنجز وعده ونصر عبده وعز جنده وهزم الأحزاب وحده فله الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت ويحيي وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
صلاة العصر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم أحينا حياة محمد وذريته وأمتنا مماتهم وتوفنا على ملتهم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إن مغفرتك أرجى من عملي وإن رحمتك أوسع من ذنبي. اللهم إن كان ذنبي عندك عظيما فعفوك أعظم من ذنبي. اللهم إن لم أكن أهلا أن نبلغ رحمتك فرحمتك أهل أن تبلغني وتسعني لأنها وسعت كل شيء برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين. السلام على الأئمة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.